Welcome to the Grand Theft World podcast, hosted and sponsored by GrandTheftWorld.com. This is episode 128, the eruption of corruption, and we're going to go through some of the bigger news pieces of this past week that need a little further adjudication, some references, some deep dives, the things you actually need to do to put the fragmented pieces together into a mosaic of understanding. We're going to have some stories tonight over the next 6 or 7 hours, such as this past week, PBS and NPR decided to throw a tantrum and leave Twitter. You see, Elon Musk, that mean and ornery man who took over Twitter, he labeled them as state-sponsored news outlets. And there's been a lot of labeling in Twitter over the past couple of years and a lot of name calling, these sort of things. So accurate labels, I guess, are offensive. And they have left the playing field, which is great because there's a lot less propaganda now that is state-sponsored by your taxpayer dollars to deceive you on the Twitterverse, in the Twitterverse, if you will.
Twitter CEO Elon Musk and Representative Lauren Boebert have called to defund NPR after its exit from Twitter yesterday. The departure comes after Twitter classified NPR as government-funded media, which the outlet said, quote, undermined public trust and its editorial independence, according to The Hill. Musk tweeted yesterday, defund NPR. This appearingly came after Musk received an email from NPR tech reporter Bobby Allen in which he asked for comment on NPR's decision to leave Twitter and if it will cause a chain reaction among news organizations. Boebert responded to Musk's defund tweet with, I've been saying that for quite some time, let's get it done. Musk's call came hours after the House GOP account tweeted the same thing, defund NPR.
Social media companies make their own independent decisions about content rules, so I won't comment on Twitter's rules, but what I will say more broadly, I'll say there's no doubt of the independence of NPR's journalists. And has been, if you've ever been on the receiving end of their questions, you know this. You know that they have their independence in journalism.
Now, also, another news agency long affiliated with the CIA, Operation Mockingbird, was run out of the Washington Post. And this past week, the Washington Post saw fit not to protect a whistleblower, but to rat him out, as it were. There's been some documents circulating on the interwebs for the past couple months about the war in Ukraine, some Pentagon shenanigans, some skullduggery they would rather not have the public know. And when this came to the public's attention, they said, this is not real. This is Russian propaganda, disregard. Now they're saying, oh, it's real, but you shouldn't look at it. Definitely shouldn't look at it. You shouldn't look at it. So we're going to look at it because it's worth looking at. And moreover, the origins of this, the documents got leaked on a Discord server by a 21-year-old Air National Guardsman who I'm sure was not educated on a proper way to blow the whistle. He just saw some corruption and decided maybe some people should know about that. Unfortunately for him, instead of a 6 or 8 year term in the Air National Guard, he's looking at a life term in Leavenworth. And in a country that discourages and dissuades whistleblowers in a variety of ways, we no longer have a Project Veritas. We have no WikiLeaks. There is no major news outlet that will credibly put money into investigating whistleblower claims. So you leave whistleblowers very little choice but to just openly publish things on the internet. And I think that might make the world a healthier place, even though the national security might be at risk and you might put covert operatives at risk. That's the excuse for covering it up. But the original reason for censorship isn't to protect those operations, methods, or tactics. It's to protect the public from knowing about corruption. And the exposing of corruption is necessary for a healthy society. And if we continue to make political prisoners and we make examples out of these whistleblowers, you're going to have more despotism and tyranny than you could have a stick shaken at you with.
They arrested the leaker, the guy who leaked the documents from the Pentagon. But let's start this here.
That this relationship, on the one hand, between the largest media corporations in the country and on the other, the intelligence community in particular, is one of subservience and collaboration, is something that we have been writing about and reporting on and talking about for many years. But what happened in the last 48 hours is really a new manifestation of it. It's a completely new escalation. What they're really telling you is they don't even want to pretend anymore what their real function is. They are basically acknowledging to you that their role is to act as servants for the FBI and the CIA. As you know, we've been covering it on our...
So what is he talking about? He's talking about this story in the Washington Post. It says Discord member details how documents leaked from closed chat group. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
It's finally.
We got him.
A picture of Hillary Clinton like this while the camera finds the...
So this is the Washington Post. So there was these leaked documents that came out on some Discord.
Yeah, Discord. It's where a bunch of like gamers go to talk shit, I guess.
So this is a 21-year-old kid or guy, adult. He's in the National Guard. And somehow he has access to intelligence reports, and he's in the National Guard, and he's 21. This is all fishy, all this stuff. But anyway, he starts releasing it on Discords, on gamer sites. Again, all weird. And so the FBI didn't know. Well, guess what? This is from the Washington Post. So this account of how detailed intelligence documents intended for an exclusive circle of military leaders and government decision makers found their way into and then out of OG's closed community. That was his online name, the guy who did it. His name was OG.
He's 21. That's weird.
That's original gangster. It's kind of weird for a 21 to be original gangster.
It's like when young Mormons are called elder. You're an elder? You're an elder?
OG's closed community is based in part on several lengthy interviews with the Discord group member who spoke to the Washington Post on the condition of anonymity. Here, he is under 18. He's 17 years old. So the Washington Post went to this Discord where there's a handful of people that talk to each other. They talk to a 17-year-old kid to get him to turn, hey, who's the guy who leaked it? The Post obtained consent from the member's mother to speak to him and to record his remarks on video. So he revealed that it was this guy.
Wait, he asked that his voice not be obscured?
He asked that his voice not be obscured.
Will you go back one second? Look at that. This account of how detailed intelligence that were intended for an exclusive circle of military leaders and government decision makers.
But somehow he got his hand on it.
A 21-year-old National Guardsman has it.
Got his hands on it, and something that's supposed to be for the exclusive decision makers, right? Exclusive circle of military leaders and government decision makers. Then why does a 21-year-old kid from he's in the National Guard?
I know, it really threw me for a loop. And also, the information is not very exclusive. It's a big pile of shit you already know.
Most of it. So this is the guy, right? So his name is Jack Teixeira, or I don't know how you pronounce Teixeira. And it says FBI arrests 21-year-old Air National Guardsman suspected of leaking classified. Okay. So when this story in the Washington Post leaked, or when they printed this story, what they were doing was telling the FBI who the guy was. They were in Glenn Greenwald talks about how they were leading a trail of crumbs right to that guy. Now, this is crazy for news people to do this because this guy leaked sensitive information that there's some of it exposed that the government was lying about Ukraine. Two things that they're lying about. One, that we actually have special ops on the ground inside Ukraine. Now, I always just assumed that we did because we covered stories similar to this, and I said that they have people in there. So to regular people, that's a big expose, but to me, it wasn't.
Yeah.
And the other thing that they revealed was that we're spying on our adversaries. But again, everybody. So again, those are two things, I guess. So the other thing. I'm sorry, Kurt. The other thing was that the Biden administration does not expect a peace deal in all of 2023, meaning they don't want one. So those were the two. So, but again, this is something So I don't think those are really big stories. But again, they're big enough, I guess.
It's going to attract a Washington Post scumbag journalist. The fact that he was a gamer. That's one of their favorite.
Yes, it is.
Dangerous groups.
So what does the Washington Post do? They basically go and do the FBI's job for them. And what does so the FBI finds the guy. And what does Glenn Greenwald have to say about that?
Watched all day today as not a single journalist in corporate media stood up and said, wait a minute, is this really our role? Is it our role now to act as law enforcement where we're gonna expose leakers to the public and ensure they go to prison? Isn't it supposed to be our role to work with leakers and encourage them to come forward and give us information about what the government is doing in secret that is the truth rather than what they're telling the public? Now, journalists play the role of hunting leakers and wanting to see people punished who disclose classified information. But evidently that is not just the role of the Washington Post, but the understanding of the role of almost everybody in corporate media, because virtually nobody stood up and said, wait a minute, we shouldn't be doing this. This is the opposite of our role.
Okay, in the days after the leaks came to light, what steps has DoD taken to reduce the number of people who have access to not only these classified briefings, but the classified material in general? But you are taking steps to tighten that, I guess, population who might have access to this level of information.
General Ryder, you say that there are strict protocols in place, and yet a 21-year-old airman was able to access some of the nation's top secrets. How did this happen, and isn't this a massive security breach? What is your message to anyone who might be thinking of leaking these kind of documents in the future?
Can you tell us, are there less people who have access to this type of information today than there were a week ago?
To follow on that, these documents were available long before April 5th and 6th. So what took so long for DOD and the intelligence communities to locate these documents?
Are you going to release this airman's service record?
They're upset.
What technologies is the Pentagon applying right now to both spot leaked documents online and track potential indicators of leaking type practices?
These are journalists upset about leaks from the Pentagon, and they want to know how the Pentagon's going to clamp down on them.
Budweiser did a lot of research, and they managed to produce the most expensive beer can in the history of mankind. This is a story we did not want to cover last week. We barely even alluded to it, but it cost Budweiser between $5 and $7 billion in market cap. And it's not going to stop anytime soon. There are people taking up kind of permanent positions and boycotts, and these sort of things are going on out there. So it's an example of pushing back against the woke agenda by people actually voting with their dollars. And the memes have been priceless on that topic.
Cue the Alphabet People's undisputed #1 grifter, Dylan Mulvaney.
Hi. Impressive carrying skills, right? I got some Bud Lights for us.
Nice outfit. Totally normal female attire and not part of a contrived performance act at all.
So, I kept hearing about this thing called March Madness, and I thought we were all just having a hectic month, but it turns out it has something to do with sports.
I laughed on the inside.
This month I celebrated my day 365 of womanhood, and Bud Light sent me possibly the best gift ever, a can with my face on it.
Not blackface, but woman face.
Check out my Instagram story to see how you can enjoy March Madness with Bud Light.
Nah, you're alright.
Love ya! Cheers! Woo!
And here we go again. The transgender movement proving once again how marginalised and oppressed it really is. While one of its most visible advocates enjoys a lucrative sponsorship deal with a product owned by Anheuser-Busch, the largest brewing company in the world, net worth $115 billion. So oppressed, so marginalised.
Woo!
How can we appeal to the kids? Global corporate hegemony says trans rights. What's next? Is Amazon going to give Elliot Page $1 million to illustrate how discriminated against they-thems are in society? I guess you just don't know true struggle and subjugation until you're being bowed down to on primetime TV.
Oh, please. Do you know?
Seems Budweiser's core demographic is really changing fast. Me and the boys celebrating our upcoming vaginoplasty surgeries.
Bud Light. Preferred beverage at sporting events, concerts, and tawdry burlesque shows. From a man who places electrical tape over his nipples. Perfect beer for blowing out the pipes.
When you show up to the party with Dylan Mulvaney Bud Light cans, rumour has it all the old classic commercials are being updated to reflect this newfound diversity. Liquid ESG. But Dylan wasn't done clamouring for clout and attention. makes Gamer Girl bathwater look wholesome in comparison.
Rise up, Gamer Boy.
Is the Bud Light thing an April Fool's joke? Conservative radio host Eric Erickson tweeted. I mean, it is trash beer, but given the constituent demo of Bud Light drinkers, it seems like a terrible marketing thing. Oh, Eric. Go woke, get broke. Doubt it, given that Budweiser tastes like stale piss. Not that I'd know, Sam Smith told me. People with more than 2 brain cells to rub together aren't drinking it anyway. I mean, Bud Light identifies as a beer, but fuck knows what's actually in it. Pretends to be a woman, pretends to be a beer. So who's even left to boycott it? If you're moronic enough to be consuming Budweiser, you probably think Dylan Mulvaney's a woman anyway. Woo! The backlash itself is worth millions of dollars in free advertising. That's why they do it. They don't care about a limp-wristed flash in the pan boycott that's going to last about 5 minutes. They want the backlash. That's the point. And boy, are conservative boomers like Kid Rock keen to be willing participants in that engineered backlash.
Fuck Bud Light and fuck Anheuser-Busch.
Right-wing snowflake triggered. Meanwhile, McDonald's saw the Budweiser Dylan Mulvaney collab and said, hold my beer. Yes, people, it's finally happened. The meme has been fulfilled. One more time for old time's sake. Behold our newest ad campaign. Tasty. Are you sure this will help us sell more burgers? Burgers? It's about beating you over the head repeatedly with the message. Woo! The purpose of progressive propaganda is not to persuade or convince, not to inform, but to humiliate. And so the less it corresponds to reality, the better. When people are forced to remain silent when they're being told the most obvious lies, or even worse, when they are forced to repeat the lies themselves, they lose their sense of probity. To assent to obvious lies is to become evil oneself. One standing to resist anything is eroded. A society of emasculated liars is easy to control.
Last but not least, Jamie Dimon he's being called to testify in the U.S. Virgin Islands on a case that has something to do with the guy named Jeffrey Epstein. Yes, I know you're not supposed to say his name. You're supposed to say something else so you don't get censored. Jeffrey Epstein was greatly facilitated by JPMorgan Chase, specifically Jamie Dimon. And Jamie Dimon is the same guy who said yesterday or the day before he wants to claim your land for eminent domain to put up some wind farms. Depending on where you live, he thinks he has the right to do that. But at the same time, he's in the Epstein cover-up. Probably has been to Lolita Express Station and down to the Little St. James Island, these sort of things. So there's a big cover-up going on in the banking world. And the same people that are pushing this ESG, environmental social governance, global warming, climate change rules that change your life, they're also the ones on the Epstein client list.
Well, the tentacles of Jeffrey Epstein go wide and they go deep, and they reach right into Jamie Dimon, who is the JPMorgan chief executive. Jamie Dimon, he's going to be interviewed under oath now in these Jeffrey Epstein lawsuits. Investigative journalist Whitney Webb has been covering this story from the very beginning. She's written a great new piece called The Rise of Jamie Dimon on her website, unlimitedhangout.com. I encourage all of you to read it. So, what is this connection, this Jeffrey Epstein connection, and how big and wide does this go beyond Jeffrey Epstein?
Okay, so for people that don't know, Jamie Dimon is the CEO, and he has been since the early 2000s, of JPMorgan Chase, one of the biggest banks on Wall Street. And he's considered one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, Wall Street banker today. And he's currently in the news in relation to the Epstein case because there is a lawsuit being brought from the U.S. Virgin Islands, which argues that Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking activity was directly enabled by Jeffrey Epstein, particularly by 2 JPMorgan executives. The main focus of the case being Jess Staley, who left the bank in around 2013. But they've alleged that lawyers for the USVI have alleged that Jamie Dimon himself was aware of the situation and directly enabled Epstein, and the JPMorgan Chase has denied this and is trying to make Staley, essentially the scapegoat for the whole case and trying to keep Dimon away from it. But he's going to be Dimon is going to be forced to offer a statement or potentially be interviewed under oath. So it remains to be seen what's going on there and how deep those questions will go. Obviously, the U.S. Virgin Islands is making a very praiseworthy effort to hold this particular bank to account. And let's keep in mind that a few days after this this exact lawsuit was filed, the Attorney General of the U.S. Virgin Islands, Denise George, was fired. And so a lot of people see a connection between that firing and her filing of this particular lawsuit, which has been allowed to advance in U.S. courts despite JPMorgan and Chase trying to prevent that from happening. So, but what hasn't been said, right?
Well, no, I just want to ask you, so we'll get to the what hasn't been said part, but just to be clear, you say that JPMorgan Chase was enabling this sex trafficking by Epstein. That's what the lawsuit alleges. Can you be specific? How were they enabling that?
So, so someone that was actually at the hearing sent me a leaked recording of it, and there was a lot that happened there that did not make it into mainstream press reports. One of them being that it was very clear from JPMorgan internal reports that Jeffrey Epstein allegedly was having a financial advisory firm at the time, but his accounts at JPMorgan reflect no activity that would have potentially involved any sort of clients. It was very odd financial activity, and he was making payments to known victims of his sex trafficking scheme, and he was using JPMorgan to give significant loans to Jean-Luc Brunel's MC2 business. And Jean-Luc Brunel, of course, is a major part of the Epstein case, particularly as it relates to the sex trafficking activities. And he, of course, was arrested in Paris and died under the same circumstances as Epstein did in a jail cell in what was ruled a suicide, but is very unlikely to actually have been the case. And JPMorgan is alleged to have directly facilitated that because given their own internal admissions about the oddities of the report, the oddities of Epstein's account, something should have been done long ago and nothing was done. And they allege, the USVI say that they'll be providing documents that show that this went far beyond gestali and actually go straight to the executive suite, meaning Jamie Dimon.
Wow. So what's not being said? I'm sorry to interrupt you earlier, but I want to know how this enabling process is unbelievable and much deeper than I even anticipated.
Yeah, so basically what's not being said is that the reason Jamie Dimon is head of JPMorgan Chase at all really has to do intimately with the circle around Leslie Wexner, particularly his right-hand man, John W. Kessler. So, Leslie Wexner has two hands, and as someone who's researched him a lot, essentially you have on the one hand Kessler and you had on the other hand Epstein. That's how close these particular associates of him were. And Kessler, in addition with a particular family from Chicago that's part of the same network I write about in the book that has a lot of connections to Wexner, the Crown family of Chicago, were essentially the people that orchestrated Jamie Dimon's installment as CEO of Bank One in the year 2000. So the Crown family essentially orchestrated the ouster of the previous CEO, and then Kessler and this sort of Wexner-centric team on the board of Bank One, along with the Crown family and their associates, came together and chose Jamie Dimon to be the CEO of Bank One. And Bank One, a few years later, was acquired by JPMorgan Chase, and Jamie Dimon was put in charge of that. So essentially what my article shows is what Bank One was before that point, and going way, 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 way back, very Wexner-centric, allegedly involved in all sorts of criminal activity, including money laundering, arms deals, and very shady financial connections with Leslie Wexner's The Limited, among other things. And on top of that, if you look at Dimon's history before he became CEO of Bank One, he was building Citigroup with his mentor, Sandy Weil, and that began with a company they acquired in 1985 called Commercial Credit Corporation. And as I note in the article, Commercial Credit Corporation and its parent company, Control Data Corp, are essentially espionage cutouts tied to these networks of intelligence and organized crime that were working together to essentially make money, but also were subverting U.S. National security by engaging in illicit technology transfers. They were spying on the U.S. military, and they were, essentially shipping off a bunch of sensitive U.S. military and other types of technology to the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War, in the same networks that include people like Robert Maxwell and his confidant and lawyer, the father of current U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, Samuel P. And a lot of these people are intimately connected. As I note in the article, a lot of it seemed to have been centered around this particular think tank called the American Committee for U.S.-Soviet Relations, which had a lot of these organized crime figures, people close to the Crown family, like Paul Zifrin, people close to Robert Maxwell, people like Armand Hammer, whose father was a Soviet spy and tried to buy a bank where a lot of U.S. congressmen had accounts for the purposes of financially blackmailing them. These guys were extremely aggressive in promoting tech transfers to the Soviet Union for the purpose of essentially equalizing the playing field in a sense. But as Samuel Pisar told Congress in the early 70s, it was to create a single unified world economy where you have private Western capitalist enterprises merging their activities with communist state-run enterprises and ostensible adversary nations with the goal of creating a global a single, economic economy. It's very disturbing stuff.
So we need to break into stories like this, because if we don't call out that type of hypocrisy, you're left to let the tyrants and the criminals and the people who do things that are unmentionable as your rulers. And learning how to be a little bit more autonomous starts with understanding your environment as well as yourself. So let's get tonight's tour of these news stories kicked off. Let's go to Luke Radowski of wearechange.org.
Give us a go. And I'm saying... I say, sir, that you don't know what you're talking about. Really? Yes, because you can't give a single example of hateful content, not even one tweet. And yet you claim that the hateful content was high. Well, that's a false. No, what I claim. What I claim was.
That guy tried to take out Elon and ended up taking himself out, huh? Interesting how that happens.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man.